Hallo en welkom allemaal op de online Vredesdag 2020. Mijn naam is Arno van der Veen en ik ben de voorzitter van Rood, de jongerenorganisatie van de SP. Vandaag hebben we verschillende internationale gasten en daarom zal de voertaal vanavond in het Engels zijn. Achteraf zullen we de stream vertalen en ondertiteld online plaatsen. Dus voor ieder die dit moeilijk kan volgen, wees gerust. Er komt een herhaling op de Facebook en op de YouTube. Hello and welcome to you all at this online Day of Peace 2020. My name is Arno van der Veen and I'm the chair of Rood, which means red in Dutch. And it's the youth organization of the Socialist Party in the Netherlands. A special welcome from our viewers up from abroad. And it's a special Day of Peace because we can't gather physical this year. We're still exploring our opportunities to organize a bigger Day of Peace in autumn or later this year or next year. But while the corona crisis continues, weapon producers are getting loaded as never before. At the background of becoming more and more relevant actual climate crisis, still more and more fossil fuels are being pulled out of the ground. And the result, as always, are civilians getting slaughtered and more refugees on which extreme right-wing parties flourishes. The so-called strong men who not only pollute the world by more fossil fuels, but also with racism and oppression, they flourish as well. In the coming hour, we will discuss how to resist towards war, racism, and oppression. I want to invite everyone to join our conversation today by sending in your questions via the button you see in your screen below. You can do this by sending an email or join our chat at YouTube. Now it's time to get to know our guests, which I also wish a very warm welcome. Today we've got Medea Benjamin, co-founder of Code Pink, Lowkey, rapper and activist, and Sadet Karabulut, member of parliament for our Socialist Party, joining us. First of all, Lowkey, welcome to the stream. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm a hip-hop artist who goes by the name of Lowkey, British, of Iraqi origin, born in 1986, and lived through the war on terror, in which, as Sinan Antoun, the Iraqi novelist, put it this way when asked how it was to be an Iraqi in New York during the war on terror, he said it was like being a barbarian in Rome. We live in the metropole of a entity during this time as a person with some form of affinity to those that have been victims of the war on terror. In a way, it forced my politics into a position outside of the existing political system. It allowed me to think more critically about what my government was doing. I was politicized by the mass mobilizations which took place here. As you know, 2003, this was the largest simultaneous mobilization of people across the world in recorded human history against the Iraq war. It's believed around 2 million people mobilized here. Through that movement and through the solidarity movement with the Palestinians, I became more politicized, more involved, and obviously was doing everything I could to get Jeremy Corbyn elected in the last elections that we had here. Unfortunately, I underestimated, and the rest of us underestimated, the malignancy of the existing orthodoxy within our political system. Two necro-political policies, which, as we have seen, unfortunately, in the last few months, have had disastrous consequences.
Yeah, thank you. You're a rapper, and most of your music is very political, I would say. You speak out against racism, neoliberalism, in favor of social justice, and literally giving the voiceless a voice. Was the Iraqi war, or a moment before that, was that the first time you knew you wanted to, well, use your talents as a rapper in favor of those political purposes?
Well, I would just say that I personally subscribe to Arundhati Roy's view of this idea of voices and voicelessness. You know, there are just the people who are conveniently unheard, who are ghettoized outside the earshot of the masses. And so what I attempt to do through the music is use personal pain and convert it into collective energy. I aim for my music to be useful in that building of critical mass, which is necessary. It wasn't just the war in Iraq, it was being part of a generation that saw, after 2010, 120,000 people die, according to Professor Danny Dorling of Oxford University, from measures of austerity, while simultaneously we saw the 500 richest people in the country saw their wealth increase massively. So it's seeing those social stratifications within the society. It's living opposite Grenfell Tower where my neighbors died. It's all of those things came together in a perfect storm to push me in a more political direction.
Thank you. We'll get further into your story in a moment, Lowkey. If you watch this and you come up with a question to say, don't hesitate, send them in, please, at the bottom you see in your screen below. Also, Lowkey will be performing at the end of our stream, so make sure you'll make it till the end, so you can see Lowkey's performance. Then Medea Benjamin, also warm welcome to our stream. Could you also please introduce yourself?
Yes, Medea Benjamin. I live for the most part in the belly of the beast, the real belly of the beast in Washington, D.C. Lowkey, I want to say how horrified and I have been by my government's activities to destroy the beautiful country of Iraq. I was there several times, and each time I went, I saw how it was sinking more and more into sectarian violence that the US brought to Iraq. I saw the same thing. I'm of the generation of Vietnam, where we rose up against US intervention there. So I learned at a young age never to trust my government, that war was wrong. I saw US involvement in the wars in Central America during the 80s. I've been an anti-war activist then basically all my life from the time I was a teenager. And I have also recognized that the same kind of racism that the US exhibits in its overseas policies is reflected in the US. And so I have been part of movements over the years in the United States to address what is now exposed to the entire world, the structural racism that has existed from the time our country was founded. Supposedly Christopher Columbus coming and discovering America, the genocide against the Native Americans, the slavery. So this is a particularly exciting and scary time to be living in the United States. I've been very involved in the Bernie Sanders campaign. It's been wonderful to see the enthusiasm for a different kind of system, a socialist system, especially among young people in the United States, a repudiation of the US empire from within, and yet, as Lowkey was saying, around the way that the forces came together to attack Jeremy Corbyn, we saw similar forces coming together with the case of Bernie Sanders to squash his candidacy and bring us a candidate for the Democratic Party that I can only say in generous terms puts people to sleep. He is a very mainstream candidate. He is a very old school candidate. And he is somebody who doesn't arouse enthusiasm through any generation, much less the young generation. And yet, when you see what we're up against with Trump, it really makes us tremble when we saw the troops that he called out into the streets against peaceful protesters in the last 2 weeks. It made us really nervous about what will happen in November when we have elections. And we don't think that Donald Trump will ever admit that he has lost an election. So we're in a very precarious situation in the United States right now. And it's wonderful to be with you, to be talking about international solidarity, because we really need it.
Thank you for joining us. You're a co-founder of a feminist anti-war organization called Code Pink. Please explain, how did you feel the necessity to found it, basically? Why is there a combination between feminism and anti-war politics?
We felt at the time, which was in the lead up to the Iraq War, that there was this overdose of testosterone between Saddam Hussein in Iraq, between George Bush in the United States, and then as the war in terror with Osama bin Laden, that there needed to be voices of women, and there needed to be the policy outlook of women, that the attack that we suffered now in 9/11, 2000, well, many years ago now, should have been dealt with through bringing the attackers to justice in our justice system, and not used as an excuse to attack either Afghanistan or Iraq. So we created Code Pink, our organization, as an alternative voice to what we were hearing through the men in charge and through the male-dominated media as well. And we have been fighting ever since against US wars, the ongoing wars in the Middle East, now the threats of new wars in Iran and Venezuela, the US economic sanctions that are designed to strangle people's ability to feed themselves, to provide for their families. We're showing how it particularly hurts women. In fact, on Tuesday, if anyone wants to join, we're having a webinar with women from Iraq, Iran, Venezuela, and North Korea to talk about how these policies have a particularly negative effect on the most vulnerable, including women. And so we have been working also to divest our country from what we call the war machine.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, our final guest, Sadet Karabulut. Great to see you again. Most viewers, especially from the Netherlands, probably already know you, but you're also famous for the strong man syndrome and an overdose of testosterone and your criticism on that. So Sadet, could you also please introduce yourself?
Yeah, good evening. It's an honor for me to be together with you, Lowkey, Medea. I'm admiring all the work that you're doing in your countries, in the UK and the US. I think it's very, very important in these times where we see that the strong man syndrome is wearing all over the world, and where with wars, they try to destroy us and humanity with the fossil fuel, etc., that we build on this international solidarity. And I think there's lots of things that we can learn from you. For me, as you told already, so Arno, I'm member of parliament since 2006 for the Socialist Party, but I'm already in the activist movements like the anti-racist movement since I was, I think, 15, and that's a lot of years ago, but also in the peace movement. And it's like Lowkey told us, I also politicized extra during the when the Afghanistan and Iraq war started. We also had here in the Netherlands huge movement on the streets, where also my party, the Socialist Party, at that time I wasn't a member of the Socialist Party, but they were also on the streets. And from that moment on, I also joined the peace movement. And what I tried to do in the parliament, because we are a small country, but an important country and also a NATO country. And what is actually happening since 2001 is that our Dutch government, the Netherlands, sometimes politically, sometimes with military, they support the war politics, the war on terror that gave us more terrorism. And we try to raise that question also to get peace politics instead of permanent war politics in the Dutch parliament, but also in the Dutch streets. And I think it is very important that in these times with the COVID-19, where we see that a couple of big issues like the permanent wars, inequality, but also the climate movement, that we try to combine and to build up this movement grassroots, so that we can build on this different world. Because I think it's a very, we have big chances, but I also see the big risk that people, strong men like some people, like they call themselves, Trump, Erdogan, Putin, etc., that they will get this momentum to push on their politics. And I think we should push back, and not only push back, but build on that international movement to change the world.
Thank you very much. And speaking of international solidarity and how to shape that, the last couple of weeks we've seen an enormous international movement against racism, started in the USA, but as widespread over the entire world. What can we learn from that? And it's a question maybe first for Medea, which is from the USA. What can we learn from that, and how to shape an international solidarity for the future, not only in times of Corona, but especially for later on? Is Medea still there? Because her video went off.
Yes, I am here.
There you are.
And I think the video will come back on. Well, first I just want to say we have been so excited by all of the protests that have cropped up around the world. And I think it's not only, let me just, can you hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
we can.
All the protests that have cropped up around the world have been so important to us. It's given a sense of, it's forced even the mainstream political parties to start looking at why has this become such an issue, and why is it that the world sees what so many people inside the US still refuse to see, this systemic racism issue. And so anybody who is watching, who has been out on the streets, we thank you for it. And also that it's reflected not only what is happening in the United States, but in your own countries, because these issues of racism, anti-immigrant issues, so many of these issues affect all of our countries. And in terms of the kind of solidarity, we also know that our countries are not only NATO countries that are putting way too many of our resources into militarism, but that our countries are dependent on weapons sales. And so we are fighting against the weaponization of our streets. There is a program in the United States where the Pentagon actually donates weapons, war grade equipment to the police. So the police get tanks, they get grenades, they get tear gas, they get the assault weapons. And you have seen in the last few weeks what it looks like, which is the war come home into the streets of the United States. So we have been fighting to stop that program where the Pentagon gives these weapons to our police. It's a program called Demilitarize the Police. And we're also fighting against the weapon sales that the US does, especially to places like Saudi Arabia that then are used against the people of Yemen, or to Israel, where they're used against the people of Palestine. And in that fight against those sale of weapons, we really need to work together, because as soon as one of our government says, okay, we're going to stop the sale, then another government steps in to provide those weapons. So it really has to be a global movement that works to stop the sale of weapons, the dependence on this weapons industry for jobs in our countries that we must overcome.
Yes, thank you. And so the international pressure might help in this situation where we see, well, on national level, people don't see why it's wrong or why it shouldn't be happening. Lowkey, how do we need to organize international solidarity within this crisis in the world? How do you see this for the future? You're still currently muted. Yeah.
Okay. Firstly, thank you to Medea and Sadet. It's great to learn from you both today. Firstly, in the United States of America, you have a situation where people have been given $1,200, which, when you look at the median income, adds up to about a week and a half's worth of wage to last them 3 months. So while you have a situation where African Americans represent 13% of the population, but they make up 40% of the prison population, where there's 10.6 million admissions into jail a year, where there's more people in jail than there is in the city of Philadelphia or the city of Dallas, where people are making about 86 cents per day in US prisons, yet they are worth $60,000 per year to private interest. The situation you see is the way that police deal with African Americans is, yes, an extension of the history of African American people within the US, but also an extension of that relationship between the penal system and between people that are viewed as potential economic units within it. Now, that is a relationship, new Jim Crow, apartheid rule, essentially, in the United States previously. All of those lineages come along to create the situation we have now. If we look around the world off the back of what is undoubtedly the biggest economic crisis that this world has seen, at least since the Great Depression from 1929, let's not forget that many believe the way that the United States was able to get out of that depression was in 1941 when it entered World War II. Meaning you need people to be in the army, you needed people to stitch uniforms, you needed people to make weaponry. We need to make sure that Donald Trump, in all of his strange and ridiculous schemes, does not look at war as a potential antidote to their economic situation in the US. When we think of the remittances, the wages that are being sent home by migrant workers, they are set to drop by $142 billion. They have already dropped by 20%, and they are estimated to potentially drop by 28%. If you look at a country like Tajikistan, a country like Nepal, where around 30% of the GDP is based upon remittances going home. You look at Haiti, you look at the Philippines, you look at South Sudan, 34% of their GDP is based on remittances going home. A country like Nigeria that gets $24 billion per year in remittances. Egypt that gets $27 billion per year in remittances. This understanding of appreciating human life needs to spread across the system that we see and allow us to understand this economic crisis as a burden that is not distributed equally in a local way, and certainly is not distributed equally in a global way, and will not be. Here in Britain, for example, if you're a black man, you're 4.2 times more likely to die from COVID-19. If you are a Pakistani or a Bengali man, you are 1.8 times more likely to die from COVID-19. Why is that? Well, in terms of crowdedness in housing, you are more likely to live in overcrowded housing if you are a black man. The majority of people that live above the 4th floor in social housing tower blocks are ethnic minorities. So you have a direct correlation between living conditions, the likelihood of jobs that people have. You're more likely to work as a security guard, which is identified as the most risky job. Care workers, taxi drivers, these are people more exposed to danger, especially in the British context. So it's understanding that our solidarity and that the core lesson that must be emphasized at this is consideration of human life and value of human life. But if we extend that value of human life across the board to realize in this economic crisis that there are going to be people around the world suffering deeply and express our solidarity with them. We look at an EU agency like Frontex, which mans the Mediterranean. And since the last 30 years or so, you've seen around 34,000 people die trying to get into Europe. If we were to read out all of their names, it would take us 9 hours. Many of them have drowned in the Mediterranean. Those lives also matter and must be also added to our understanding of valuing those who are less valued. The idea of the last coming first, that is the kind of politics that we need to aim to espouse. And in order to do that, we need to have a vision which extends out to those people also, I would say.
And you say we need to make sure that basically Trump isn't seeing war as an antidote to the virus and to economic recession.
Precisely.
Is that for you a priority and in the global peace movement to make sure Trump doesn't see war as an antidote for recession? And how do we do that?
Well, I think the key needs to be creating the conditions of political pressure on those within our country who seek to do the bidding of Trump. Turn him into the pariah that he is and make absolutely clear that dealing with him is the equivalent of dealing with some of the worst regimes of human history. If you are deprived of breath in Grenfell Tower, where you died from inhaling cyanide, if you are deprived of breath in the Mediterranean, drowning to death, if you are deprived of breath under the knee of a police officer, if you are deprived of death because of COVID-19, you cannot breathe. Those conditions are the same. The state has taken action which in some way have led to you being deprived of oxygen. And so it is by being absolutely clear that when we see people standing against Trump around the world, we are them and they are us, and we see our reflection in their faces. And that is what we must continue to assert as much as possible. The reality is that by 2030, China is projected to be the world's #1 economy. A lot is being done to try and avoid that taking place and the inevitable decline of the US global primacy. So we must look at this as an inevitable passage.
And you make, well, your music fits into this story, I think. It reminds me of your song Ahmed about the deaths in the Mediterranean and about a kid who didn't make it, basically. What do you want your listeners of your music to take with them and to take action with them, or anything? What do you want to make sure your listeners do after they listen to your music?
Well, I would want them to think critically about what it has been historically to win rights for large groups of people. Whenever people have been able to win their rights in society, it hasn't been upon the basis of films produced by Hollywood. It hasn't been on the back of foreign tanks. It has been off the back of collectivizing. You look at the way that trade unions are demonized in our societies, and you'll be able to see clearly that if we think about who it was that won the 8-hour day, who it was that worked to end child labor, who it was that won paid lunch breaks, equal pay for men and women, the abolition of sweatshops within this society. Who was it that fought for sick leave? Who was it that fought for healthcare, minimum wage, pregnancy and parental leave, the right to strike, anti-discrimination laws, overtime pay? Who was it that won these things? Who was it that fought for public education and anti-sexual harassment laws? It has been trade unions. It has been the collectivizing of people's interests. It has been off the back of collective bargaining. Going forward, we're going to be in a situation where it's estimated that half of the world's workforce will lose their job in some way. There have been estimations that 1.7 billion people will lose their jobs from the crisis that we have approaching us now. It is absolutely essential that you collectivize and that you join together with others to bargain for your interests. It is the only way to protect yourself.
Thank you very much. Medea, we just heard Lowkey said the top priority of the international peace movement should be, well, basically prevent Trump on seeing war and going into wars. Is that a priority you share with him?
Absolutely. We are very concerned about something that's been known in US history called the October surprise. Our elections take place in the beginning of November, and there have been too many times where there has been an invasion, some kind of supposed justification for a US action right before an election that would take the eyes off of the domestic problems that the president in power has. And certainly this is something that Trump is not beneath doing. And we think that the place it would happen is most likely Iran. There is a constant drumbeat of war about Iran. Iran is portrayed as the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world, where some people would say it's the United States, some people might say it's Saudi Arabia, some people might say Israel, whatever, we could have a discussion about it. But it's not Iran. And the unfortunate thing for us is that the Europeans have not been strong enough in pushing back on that. We are happy that the Europeans stayed within the Iran nuclear deal and have been working with the Iranians to keep that deal going, but it is on life support. And we are very concerned that the hardliners in Iran have now gotten more strength during their last parliamentary elections, and that this might end up being just the excuse that Trump needs to launch an attack on Iran sometime in October. So we need the Europeans to stand up strong, to be preemptively saying no war on Iran, to keep that nuclear deal going, to refuse to give in to Trump's calls for global sanctions, and in fact to violate openly those sanctions by doing more trade with Iran. And the other place that we think is very dangerous is Venezuela. And we would like to see more European activity there as well to preempt a US military intervention in Venezuela.
Thank you. And well, to say our solidarity with no war with Iran, the SP and Rood started a petition, which you can still sign at stopdebommen.nl for our Dutch viewers to don't go into a war with Iran. Medea, do you feel the position of Trump is shaking basically? And do you think there's a way for us Europeans, Dutch people, to show solidarity or to support the American movement for social justice and against war?
Yes, Trump's approval rating has gone down about 10% in the last 2 weeks. That's quite enormous. And he's having a terrible time now trying to figure out how he's going to rally people to his side. And he's going to do that by demonizing the protest movement, demonizing Black Lives Matter that he has said in the past were terrorists, inventing a loose network of groups, Antifa, who you also have in Europe, anti-fascist groups to say they are a terrorist organization. And I think also strengthening his alliance with the most conservative leaders around the world. So I think we need to have a show of support for the Black Lives Matter movement that's coming from overseas, not just from the streets, but also from within parliaments. So statements being passed, legislation being passed, all kinds of ways that you can think of to show the Trump administration that the world is still watching and that we consider the Trump administration the aggressor, the police the aggressor, not the people who have come out to fight against racism and state terror.
Thank you very much. Sadet, could you please explain to us what you did and what you can do from within the Dutch parliament, but also outside, especially outside the parliament, in order to organize this solidarity, and what we can learn basically from the movements outside the Netherlands, and what we can do in the future?
Yeah, thank you, Arno. Thank you, Medea and Lowkey. I think it's very important that, the issues that you mentioned in your countries, and also the global developments of growing inequality, the position of migrants and migrant workers, but also the narratives from the right-wing strongman politics, making people enemy, making movements terrorists, etc., etc. We see all these discussion and all these politics back in our countries, right? And I think it's true, and I totally agree on with Lowkey and Medea, that we should really take a stance against the politics that is pushed by Trump, but also by Bolsonaro, by Erdogan. Lots of people in lots of countries are suppressing their people, and they try to militarize the civil space. They try to militarize the world to get more power, basically. So what we see in the European countries, but especially in my country, the Netherlands, is that in most of the times they are following the foreign politics of the US. What we actually did, when they killed General Soleimani, we were also very, very afraid that this would be the step to make war with Iran. And we immediately in Parliament, but also outside of Parliament, together with Not in My Name, our youth movement, and different peace activists, we said, okay, we don't want any war with Iran. Our government shouldn't support the US government. And unfortunately, they didn't really support it but they said, we understand that they did what they did. So that's not good. But what we try to do here is to get the awareness, right? Because I'm sure that the Dutch people in general, in the Netherlands, they don't want war. But they're, of course, being antagonized by media, and they don't have all the information. So I think it's very important to make clear what the position of our government is, what is going on, and that we don't want war. And unfortunately, we are kind of the one and only party at this moment in the parliament that is telling this story. We are a different voice, and I think it's important that we try to get more people on this track. The same goes for Venezuela. We are the kingdom of the Netherlands. Venezuela is next to the island, to the Antilles. And our government, although they know that it's really wrong politics from the US, and of course that they want regime change, they recognize someone like Guaido. So, but at the same time, they are telling us we don't really want a war. So we try to push them back all the time. And to get to the latest developments in the US and around the world, the anti-racist movement, the killing of George Floyd. This week, we had in Parliament this discussion with our foreign minister. I asked him to condemn the policies of Trump, attacking peaceful activists, attacking journalists, etc., etc. And they didn't dare, the minister didn't dare to support, and the majority didn't support in Parliament, but we got the left-wing parties with us. So we have to push like this, but also build on this movement outside, because what can happen, what should happen is that we have to let to go the war and imperialist politics of UK, US, etc. Of course, Trump is threatening the EU countries. He's threatening, if you don't spend more on military, then I will get out of the NATO. So, well, good. No to NATO, we tell. But if we don't push for peace politics instead of war politics in parliament and outside, I'm afraid that some EU countries like UK, but also France, etc., that they will leave aside Trump for a while, but they will step in to fill that gap and to push the military. So we have to stand up, build on this movement, and also work together with the different movements in the different countries. There are lots of parallels, and I think we can be stronger. And what we're seeing is that one-on-one, the right-wing parties here, the populist, extremist right parties in our parliaments also, they have the same narrative, they're also blaming the people, the activists. They are also trying to get them the label of terrorist, of enemy, to divide the people. And I think one important thing for us socialists, internationalists, is to get people together, to not let us divide, and to get people together against the right-wing politics for social justice for everyone in the whole world.
Yes, thank you very much. And talking about other countries and other people where the same struggle goes on, they're not here today, but we received a letter in solidarity from our Turkish comrades and Kurdish comrades of the People's Democratic Party, called HDP. And I would like to share their letter to us with you all, guys. Dear comrades, as the People's Democratic Party in Turkey, we salute the Socialist Party, its youth in particular, with our warmest feelings of solidarity on your Peace Day. Unfortunately, we're all going through most difficult times, and not that just because of the global pandemic. Our hopes for peace, justice, and freedoms seem even more difficult to achieve in the face of rising authoritarianism, right-wing populism, xenophobia, and aggravating class, ethnic, and racial divides. In Turkey, we are fighting a relentless struggle against the authoritarian and racist rule of President Erdogan and his ultra-nationalist allies. We have thousands of comrades in prisons. There is torture, there is death, there's police brutality and military violence everywhere, particularly in Kurdish provinces. But our struggle goes on, and not just for the Kurds and other oppressed people in Turkey. We know that if we can defeat President Erdogan in Turkey, and we promise we will, it will be a great achievement for all progressive forces across Europe and the Middle East, whose right-wing populist governments often work very closely with each other. After all, the struggles we fight in different countries are not isolated from each other. They are like the streams and creeks flowing into and forming a river. HDP is an internationalist party fighting for freedom of all oppressed people of the world. Over the last few years, the Dutch Socialist Party, and especially dear Tini Cox, the chair of our United European Left Group at the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, which is called PACE, has been in constant solidarity with us in so many ways. We would like to take this opportunity to express our thanks to the Socialist Party and Tini for the truly international spirit with which they have so generously supported us. When everything feels so suffocating, and it often does in countries like Turkey, it is very empowering to see that our struggle is being acknowledged and supported by comrades like you in places far away. We have to strengthen internationalist platforms to bring together in closer resistance movements and struggles across the world. This is the only way to survive and defeat the dark forces of capitalism, patriarchy, racism, and all other ills of our time. With the hope to further improve solidarity between our peoples and parties, we salute you once again with our most revolutionary regards. With peace and solidarity, Veleknas Uja and Hisyar Usoy, which are both members of Turkish parliament and spokespersons of foreign affairs from the People Democratic Party in Turkey, and which shows for me especially the similarities between all the struggles worldwide from different people. while I read the letter, we collected all the questions we got over the mail, over the YouTube chat. Thanks for sending in lots of questions. I don't know whether we come to all of the questions, but we'll give it a shot. And let's start with first question, and I think it's for Sadet, and it's from a question from Elena, and she doesn't know really what we mean by we, but do we have it in us as we to hold the US accountable for their actions? Do we dare to do it? And if we don't, how do we make sure that we dare to take, well, to make US responsible for their actions? Do we dare doing that?
Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what Elena means with do we, but talking about the Dutch government, no, they don't, you know. That's the continuous discussion that we have in Parliament and also outside Parliament, that they can't be as critical towards the US as they are, for example, towards Russia. And that's a big problem. It was also shown this week in Parliament, you just simply ask to condemn the illegal actions against journalists and peaceful protesters, and they don't dare. So that's a big problem, and we know that that they aren't being held accountable for all that they did in Iraq, in Afghanistan, etc., even though we have lots of reports about the truth about wars, because sometimes our governments, not sometimes, lots of times they present the wars that we participate in as clean wars, as if it's not about people and dying people. And we had a couple of scandals, and also about the civilian deaths, for example, due to a Dutch bombardment in Iraq, Harija, in 2015. They didn't tell us, but we knew through investigation of journalists that at least 70 people died, you know, and our countries and also the US, they have to keep accountable for that. And the only way to get them accountable is to stop the wars, to get the truth in Parliament, but also in society, and to build on this peace movement. You know, that's the only way, because we know in this world, the capitalist system, imperialism is still going on, and the people with power, for the moment, inequality they push on, they get away with that. But we also know that we are, with a lot of more people than only the few at the top who try to divide us and only take care for themselves.
Thank you. And there's a question for both Lowkey and Medea, and then from Wouter, which is an activist from the Netherlands, and he's asking, well, which action tactics aren't very known right now, but we should use in the Netherlands and implement in our own peace movement? Do you have any examples of tactics that you know but are not well known? I think Medea wants to speak first.
Well, I also wanted to just say something addressing the last question, because I think when Sadet was talking about the crimes in the ongoing wars, let's recognize that the Trump administration just sanctioned the members of the International Criminal Court that are involved in investigating US war crimes in Afghanistan. And I would love to hear more of a global outcry of how dare you sanction people who are looking into the not just the history, but the ongoing activities of our governments in Afghanistan. And then in terms of new tactics, well, it's been really beautiful to see on the local level how cities in the United States have taken this on, taking the symbols of racism, for example, the statues in the town squares and the parks, inside the state buildings, and just toppling them. It's also been exciting to see how people are now going directly to the homes of the people in power or the heads of the police departments and doing sit-ins, die-ins on the streets outside their homes. Talking about the streets, it is also not just the chanting in the streets, but also the very heartfelt kind of taking almost 9 minutes of silence where people are kneeling down in the streets to symbolize the time that that George Floyd was on the ground with the police on his neck. Also, I think the die-ins have been very effective, going onto streets, major streets, and just lying down is a very symbolic but effective kind of action. So those are just some that come to mind, but it's, I think, going to be exciting in the next few weeks, in the next few months, as people hopefully are a little bit safer to, in terms of coronavirus, to be coming out. There will be a lot of new tactics. Oh, one thing I should mention that has gone around the world is the mayor of Washington, D.C., when she painted in huge letters on the streets, Black Lives Matter, which was very exciting, except for the Black Lives Matter groups in Washington, D.C., knowing that she has sided with the police in many situations of police brutality. And so they painted right next to it, defund the police, and put her in a very difficult situation where she couldn't take it off and had to acknowledge that people have the right to express themselves. So painting in the streets has been a very exciting addition to some of the tactics.
Painting in the streets. We do it with chalkboard, but you can also do it with paint. Lowkey, do you have got some tactics to share with us?
So I would say there's been a few examples that are of varied success. So the Ministry of Defence in this country has had to pay out around £20 million for compensation for families that lost their loved ones in Iraq because of the British Army. If people can get involved in such legal actions, and this has been a real thorn in the side of the British establishment, who have done a lot to try and stop such cases coming up. So if people can get involved in court cases like that, you also have examples of people occupying weapons factories around the time of bombings, like the bombing in Lebanon. You had a group, the Raytheon nine people in Ireland, who occupied a factory for the US arms company Raytheon. Also, you know, these people were arrested and went through the court system, but through the very court case, they were able to force into the public sphere information about the way those weapons were being used. Now, what I think is important is that we are able to find as many platforms as we can to make the kind of arguments which will be more and more salient in the period coming of economic hardship. Joseph Stiglitz put it this way: the spending on military was part of the reason for the crash that we got in 2008, because it was an uneven distribution of resource. Arms dealers and arms companies generally say that they are essential for the economy of any country they are in because they provide jobs. But in fact, research found that for every $1 billion that is spent on the arms industry, it only creates 11,200 jobs. Clean energy as an industry, for every billion invested in it, creates 16,800 jobs. Healthcare, for every billion spent on it, is believed to produce 17,200 jobs. And education, for every billion that is spent on it, creates 26,700 jobs. We know that if the arms industry was to be, to some extent, dismantled, you would have two ways in which it would create jobs. We're not talking about a complete dismantling. We're talking about at least partially. The subsidies that are spent on the arms industry, and in Britain, the arms industry is the most subsidized industry in consideration that Britain has 19% of all arms exports. Those subsidies would go elsewhere. They would go on other important things within the society. Also, we can't forget that the defense industry actually takes vital skills away from the civilian sector. So, for example, those that are able to work on weapons can also work on important things like hybrid engines or dialysis machines, things that could help people today. So we need to emphasize the point that the workers in these situations, we sympathize with them and support them, but we also need to make clear that their expertise and their knowledge can be directed into mechanisms and contraptions that give life and help life rather than machines which take life and hurt people.
You get a very interesting song about the arms trade and the arms industry, which is called Lords of War. So everyone who is more interested about your view on this, I would recommend listening to that. In this discussion, which is emphasized, is this money going into the arms trades and into the arms industry, is this something we need to emphasize more in times of Corona, where, well, our care workers couldn't have the essential needs to do their work safely? Is that something we need to emphasize more?
Is this a question directed to me?
Yeah, it is.
Well, you know, as I said, when you look at the subsidies that go into the arms trade in Britain, you're talking about the most subsidized industry. Billions gets invested by the Ministry of Defense in research and development, but it only represents 1.7% of the total value of British exports. And you look at BAE Systems, the biggest arms company in this country and one of the biggest arms company in the world, it only contributes 0.6% of Britain's GDP. So when we look at global military spending on NATO, it's 53.9% of all global military spending. And the most expensive weapons program that is known to human history is the F-35, that approximately cost $1.4 trillion to build and operate across its lifetime. You look at 40% of all global corruption is in the sale of armaments. And the Pentagon has a budget which is 14 times bigger than that of the State Department. The United States only contributes 0.5% of what it spends on military activities to peacekeeping. So when we look at this maldistribution of resource, the US spends something like $700 billion per year on the arms industry. The only figure that is similar to that is the $750 billion per year that it spends subsidizing the fossil fuel companies. And globally, it's $5 trillion that governments across the world give to the fossil fuel industry. The US only spends 0.2% of its national budget on the Environmental Protection Agency. These numbers need to be put back into place. The US military is the world's biggest consumer of fossil fuels and the biggest polluter. So we are going to have to square this circle somehow. If we're in a situation where organized human life as we know it is going to be more and more difficult going forward, then we're going to have to find a way to more realistically and more adequately distribute these resources and these figures.
Thank you. Very clear.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure.
Because we talked about tactics. One thing that we have been doing that we're very excited about is a campaign called Divest from the War Machine, where we ask cities, universities, faith-based institutions, financial managers to take their money out of the weapons industry. And we're also working together with other movements. For example, BlackRock, the largest financial manager of assets in the world. We are now working as getting them out of the weapons industry, getting them out of the detention centers, the private prison industry, and out of fossil fuels as well. So it's a great way to bring different movements together and look at where the institutions that are supposed to be investing our money for us in our cities, in our schools, in our pension funds, and make sure they're not contributing to the destruction of the planet.
Yes, thank you. And I would like to ask you another question, which came in to the comments from Irma. She's asking, well, you said there are lots of testosterone and therefore war as well. Do you think more female leaders or more female perspectives mean less war?
Well, I think that it doesn't have to be women. It has to be a feminist perspective, and men can have a feminist perspective as well. But we do have some wonderful women leaders. I think if we look at the head of New Zealand, we see somebody who has managed the coronavirus in an amazing way, has dealt with the massacre that happened there in a very beautiful way, has shown the kind of compassion that we would like to see in leaders around the world. I also think in the United States, we have the wonderful new members of our Congress. We call the Squad, 4 women of color who have really shaken up things. It's amazing in a Congress of 435 members of the House that 4 women have been able to come in and create such momentum that brings a connection between what the people outside, the people in the streets, the people in the movements are calling for, and what we want our elected officials to do. So I think it's that kind of feminine energy that could come from anybody of any gender.
Thank you for your clarification. I want to end with a last question before I give the stage or the stream to Lowkey and his performance. And it's a question to Sadet. We're talking about what we can do, but not really about what we can vote in or do concrete in this international solidarity. And we got an idea from Michel who said, well, Scotland voted to end export of tear gas, rubber bullets and riot gear to the USA. Do we see in the Netherlands any perspectives in doing this kind of stuff in order to prevent real damage in the USA or any other country with police brutality or war or anything else?
Sorry. Yeah, that's a very good idea. Actually, we already asked our government, and we're pushing on to stop exporting arms to the US because we know that parts of the arms that the Netherlands is delivering to the US is being used to make weapons who they are selling to Saudi Arabia, and they are using it in the Yemeni war. And we also had a big success with our government because of the peace movement outside of parliament, but also because we pushed in the parliament to stop exporting arms to Saudi Arabia because of the Yemen war. So it is possible, and we know that this is in different countries, but at this moment, because of the recent political developments, I think this is a very good idea. So we could work on that. Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to ask, well, maybe before it's 9:02, so we're currently wrapping up. But I want to ask you to a closing statement or some sort of thing you want to give with the audience. Is there anything you want to share with us, Medea?
Well, I wanted to put forward a positive campaign we're doing because it's times like these we need some good energy. And that is a campaign that we have with many groups, including a number of European ones, to push for the Cuban doctors to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And this is something that we can show that a small, poor country shows the world what solidarity looks like in the face of a 60-year-old embargo by the United States and in the face of a Trump administration that has been trying to sabotage that program, including now a call for sanctioning any countries that receive Cuban doctors. So you can go to a new website we're just creating. It's called cubanobel, nobel.org. And please join us in that campaign.
Thank you very much, Medea. Lowkey, do you've got a closing statement before performing for us?
I would just say thank you for having me. Love and solidarity to all. It has been great learning from you today, but I'll leave the rest for what I have to say in the lyrics at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I think it's the time for the lyrics then, because it's 9:04, and we're wrapping up. So can I give the stage to you, Lowkey?
Let's do it. Power to those that read bell hooks, power to those that sell books, power to those that know how the inside of a cell looks, all those feeling helpless, forgotten and discarded, power to the strange fruit they thought was rotten in the garden, power to those sitting alone, seeking solace in the calmness, power to those feeling stained, know your tomorrow isn't tarnished, power to those that sweep the streets with more knowledge than PhDs, power to those that keep their keys, return as promised, please believe, power to those that suffer in silence, those it hurts to hear, power to those that hold their ground, power to those that persevere, power to those that love humanity more than they love style, power to immigrants probably raising Donald Trump's child, power to the blind who can't imagine what sight is, power to those staring at the moon and all those working night shifts, power to the readers, the writers, the illiterate, power to those that struggle to decolonize their syllabus, power to the shy ones always struggle to make friends and the half of humanity worth less than 8 men, power to those that risk their life to dig the coltan from the ground for the mic I'm spitting on and the phone you're holding now, power to those that built the stadium they're playing in, power to those that mowed the grass and stitched the ball that they're playing with, power to every that doesn't rap about killing, power to the builders who build buildings that outlive them, power to the slaves of ancient Greece that never had the right to vote. Democracy dead, like power to those writing home, power to those writing poems, power to those that died alone, power to Curtis Mayfield, power to Ronald Isley, power to the fishermen that were forced into piracy, power to every person that is working in a library, power to every nurse that we turn to in our times of need, power to the unions and the miners that you punish, power to those that drive the buses and those that collect the rubbish, power to the youth desiring the truth, and power to every rapper that is dying for a fire in the booth, for those that lost limbs to King Leopold's quota and those risking their lives for the P&O to Dover, power to union leaders murdered by, power to victims of this globalized Cosa Nostra, power to those dying on the shores and the borders, power to human beings that were rendered fauna and flora, power to those that cleaned up after the stage show and carnival goers still haunted by Kelso Cole Crane's ghost, power to Kevin Carter, his picture taunts us ever after, so many questions never answered. Remember the last words of Abdul Muhsin al-Sa'doun, al-Umma tantadhar al-khidma al-Inglis la yuwafaqun, power to al-Jawahiri and his rebellions. They killed his brother Ja'far and they cursed the rotten Thamesians. Enlightened despots pursuing tactics Machiavellian. Chinese steel preceded Europe a millennium. Think about it. Printed press half a millennium. Never get close. Power to Ken Loach and every volunteer in Lesbos. Cuban doctors sent to Sri Lanka for the tsunami. Power to those that cleaned up after the Bullingdon parties. Kids knowing Apple products before they know what an apple is. Forgotten like passengers on the USS Indianapolis. Dying days before they could see what little boys' damage did. On the precipice of fascism, our passiveness is cancerous. Power to those still strong enough to dream. Power to those that chose not to be a cog in the machine. Power to those that love first and hate never. Power to those that sleep on the streets through grey weather. Power to Aziz Ali, Bone Thugs and Harmony. Power to Norman Baker, David Kelly's owner artery. Power to the genocided population of Tasmania. The internet descends to Trump-tastic fantasia. Let them try quote this. You'll never find a better diagnosis than collective psychosis. It's getting quite hopeless, but hope is all we have. Trying to cultivate the positive, not focus on the bad, but the globe's under attack. The obnoxious rage of a fake intellectual, amazing grace in age of the spectacle. Not the first time they found a racist selectable to raise to the pedestal and desecrate the place that translated the decimal. I don't want to tempt fate. Power to corpse washers like Salvador Allende. Power to language learners, from Bernie Sanders fans to flag burners. One man's inertia is another man's purpose. In the utopia of song, we are victorious, but the bittersweet reality is not this glorious. Power to Coltrane watching Malcolm X. Power to Paul Robeson under house arrest. Power to Galileo under house arrest. Power to Ibn Haytham under house arrest. Forgive me if I sound obsessed. Forgive me if I sound depressed. Believe me, that's not how it's meant. They probably thought I couldn't come back and kill the alphabet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lowkey. There's lots of love coming in from the comments, so I want to share that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us today, especially thanks to Medea and to Lowkey. It was an honor to have you guys over here at this online Zoom Day of Peace. I hope that we can welcome you once physically at another Day of Peace or another big event where we can further deepen and shape an international solidarity. I want to thank all the people who are watching us right now. I want to wish them all the best of night and hope to see everyone soon, physical, online, wherever we are. But let's build up this international solidarity. Let's build up this movement against war. And let's don't stop here, but make this a beginning. Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.